In this video, I'll show you how to make shading your drawing easy by understanding how light behaves. We'll break it down into a simple, logical approach, so you'll know exactly what to do when you shade. Shading is easy, actually, if you understand light and form. When we're shading, we're describing the light and shadow of our subject. How the light hits our subject determines which areas we make bright and which areas are dark in our drawings. When we shade a drawing, we're communicating light hitting the forms of that subject. So if we know the forms of our subject and how light behaves when it hits forms like those, then we'll know how to shade our subject. I cover how to draw forms from imagination in this video. Light rays travel in straight lines in all directions from a light source. Surfaces that those light rays hit will be illuminated, while surfaces that those light rays do not hit will be in shadow. Shadows that are caused by a form facing away from the light are called form shadows, while shadows that are caused by a form blocking the light are called cast shadows. So if we understand our forms and the position of the light source relative to those forms, we can determine which areas will be lit and which areas will be in shadow. Just dividing the subject into lit and shadow areas on its own already does a lot to describing the light and form of a subject. You can see this in action with cell shading. Not all lit surfaces are uniformly bright. Where the light hits most directly will be the brightest. This is called the highlight. As the surface turns away from the light, it gets darker, but it doesn't get darker evenly. In this example, we have a cylinder facing perpendicularly to the light, so we can see how the light wraps around its curved surface. Most of the lit area is fairly uniformly bright with only slight changes of brightness, until it starts to transition into shadow, where it gets darker much more quickly. Note the difference between an even transition between light and dark and a more realistic one. The area of similar brightness where light is slowly transitioning into shadow is called the midtone, while the area where light quickly transitions into shadow is called the halftone. Shadows aren't uniformly dark either. Variation in brightness in the shadows is caused by reflected light. Reflected light occurs when direct light bounces off a nearby surface and hits a surface that's in shadow. In this photo, the reflected light is red because it's reflecting off of a red surface. The red areas of the ball are the areas that are being hit by the reflected light. Reflected light is generally coming from the opposite direction as the main light source. This leaves a darker area in the shadow closest to the direct light, called a core shadow. The small dark area where the ball meets the table is caused by ambient occlusion. Ambient light is low-level reflected light that's coming from all directions. We don't notice ambient light except in its absence. Since ambient light is traveling in all directions, surfaces where less angles can reach will get less ambient light, causing ambient occlusion. Let's put this all together. The highlight is where the light hits most directly. Midtones are the areas of similar brightness where light is hitting directly, but not as directly as the highlight. The halftone is the area where the light quickly transitions into shadow. In the shadow, surfaces that are hit by reflected light will be the brightest. The core shadow is the dark area of the shadow that's farthest from the reflected light and usually closest to the direct light. Ambient occlusion are the dark areas where surfaces are close together and don't let in much ambient light. We see the same patterns of brightness and darkness in this bust. The forehead, the nose, and most of the cheeks are in midtone. We see highlights where the form faces the light most directly, such as on the top of the forehead and the upper chin. We see halftones where the form starts to round away from the light, such as on the right side of the forehead and the right side of the cheek. Much of the shadow area is hit by reflected light, especially on the right side. We see core shadows between the areas of reflected light and the halftone, such as on the right side of the forehead and the right cheek. We see dark ambient occlusion in narrow areas, such as below the nose and between the lips. Andrei Belloli captured similar patterns of light and dark in this painting. We can see midtones on her legs and breast where the light's not blocked by the cloth. We see highlights where the form is facing the light most directly, such as on her upper thigh. We see midtones where the form starts to curve away from the light, such as on the right sides of her legs. Again, much of the shadow area is hit by reflected light, especially on the right side. This leaves core shadows on areas that are hit by less reflected light, usually closest to the direct light. We can see a really clear core shadow between the lit area and the reflected light on her right leg. We see dark areas of ambient occlusion in areas where not much light can reach, such as her armpit, her navel, and below her breasts. Rendering a sphere is a great way to practice describing light wrapping around form. Light a ball or spherical object with a single controllable light source, like a desk lamp, and make a rendering of it. As you render, pay attention to the highlights, midtones, halftones, reflected light, core shadow, and ambient occlusion that you see. Try doing multiple versions of this, and try moving the light source around to see how it affects the appearance of the light on the form. I'll start by dividing the light and the shadow, like this. Now I'll add the highlight and the halftone towards the edge of the lit area. Instead of brightening the reflected light, I like to darken the core shadow. This is more natural for me and works better with traditional media. Now I'll add in the ambient occlusion here on the bottom, and I'll just tweak things a little bit, just to make it a little prettier. Now I'll add the cast shadow below the sphere. The edges of the shadow shape will be sharper, where the form casting the shadow is closest to the surface the shadow is cast on. I'll add a little bit of darkness behind the ball. This really makes the highlight pop. Let's try from another angle. Once again, separate light and shadow, brush on the highlight there, and add the halftone. If I was working traditionally, I would darken the midtone instead of brightening the highlight. Once again, I'll add the core shadow instead of brightening the area with reflected light. Now just tweak things based on what I see on the ball. Then I'll add some ambient occlusion below the ball. And then once again, I'll add a shadow. And I can just brush in a little bit of dark in the back. And there you go, a rendered sphere. Rendering primitives from imagination is the simplest way to practice shading from imagination. Primitives are basic forms that are simple enough to be memorized, yet versatile enough that they can be modified and combined to form the structure of nearly any subject. If we can imagine how the light would look hitting primitives, then we can imagine how that light would look hitting similar forms in a subject from imagination. To practice this, draw primitives using the technique from the form video. Then, imagine the light source that hits your subject and draw its location relative to the primitive. Render the primitive being hit by that light source using your knowledge of how light wraps around forms. Now that we can render imagined light sources on imagined forms, let's try it on an imagined character. Let's render Saitama. To do this, we have to understand his forms and the direction the light is coming from. First, I'll divide the subject into lit and shadow areas. This is the most important part of the process because it defines the forms by showing which surfaces face the light and which face away. I'll brush in some highlights where the light faces the form most directly. Then I'll add halftones on surfaces that face the light less directly, and where the form is curving away from the light. I'll add core shadows where less reflected light is hitting, usually closest to the lit area. Then I'll add dark ambient occlusion in areas where less light can reach, like under the eyebrows and under the nose. Finally, I'll refine my shading a bit to make it smoother and more appealing. When we understand how light behaves and how it appears when it wraps around forms, we can light forms from imagination. If we understand the forms of fictional subjects, like characters, and the light source hitting them, we'll know how to shade them. Shading is easy when we understand light and form. I have a lot more information and exercises like this in my book, Imaginative Drawing. This is the textbook to my Drawing Fundamentals class in animation school, but you can download it for free at imaginativedrawing.com. I plan to make more videos covering this information too, so subscribe to make sure you don't miss those. If you want to learn more about drawing fundamentals, check out this video here. I'm trying to take the art instruction I do in the classroom and bring it to the internet so I can help more people. If that's something you believe in, then help me get the word out. Like and share this video, or share the book with someone you think would benefit from it. Or just leave a comment and make fun of the way I look, because I think that's funny. Thanks for watching, and happy drawing!